Uh, Professor Wang Gangbu, Chairman of the Governing Board of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, colleagues, friends, my name is Kishore Mahbubani. I'm the Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this public lecture by Professor, I think it's Jack rather than John, am I correct? DeGioia, President of Georgetown University. The first thing I'm doing, by the way, is switching off my cell phone. As you all know, when I make some introductory remarks, I try to make 3 quick points. So this is what I'll do today. My first quick point, of course, important point is about the donor, Dr. Lee Seng Tee. He apologized to us. He's sorry that he's not here with us today, Jack. But he asked me to convey to you his best wishes. What happened was that the origins of this was that my colleague, Dr. Anne Florini, and I one day went to see him, and we told him that we have a project to save the world. He said, okay, I'm happy to join you in saving the world. So we launched the STLE project on global governance. I think the reports will be coming out soon. But as part of that series, we also launched a lecture series, and the first STLE lecture was delivered by Lee Bollinger, the president of Columbia University, and Jack, you are the second to deliver the STLE lecture. The second point I was going to make was about the topic, and I must say I can't think of a more timely topic for us to address. I won't say very much about it, Jack, since you're going to speak about it. But I can tell you, as someone who has heard so many discussions on globalization, it's clear that we are dealing with probably the single most important force in the world, and yet we are all like blind men walking around an elephant, trying to figure out what is this elephant. And that's the nature of discussions on globalization. So to have someone like Jack DeGioia share with us his impressions is, I think, very wonderful, because he lives in Washington, D.C., and as you know, Washington, D.C. is still the most important capital in the world. And frankly, the universities here have a tremendously important role to play as we deal with globalization, because globalization is causing us to come together and is also causing divisions. In some ways, you know, that we might actually face a danger of a clash of civilizations, maybe not on the grand scale, but certainly we see tensions rising. And as I was chatting with Jack in my office earlier on, we were talking about the tragic case. I'm sure you've all been following it, the case of the mosque that is going to be built in Manhattan. And it's actually not even a mosque, it's like a research center. The opposition to it shows to you the divisions that the world has to deal with. And I think that's why universities need to play a very important role in bringing the world together to address these sorts of issues. My third point is, of course, about the speaker, and I could speak a great deal about the speaker, but I'll be brief, Jack, if you'll allow me. And I want you to know that as he said to me in my office, he's a one university man. He graduated, I think in 79, from Georgetown University, and has never left it. He's been a one university man. In fact, he was telling me after graduation he wanted to go on and do his PhD. But while he was a PhD student, before he got his PhD, he became Dean of Students. And you can see how he was lured in to higher and higher positions in the university, and subsequently made history by becoming the first lay president of Georgetown University, a tremendous breakthrough on his part. And I can tell you that he's been an incredibly successful university administrator. The first thing he's done, he's raised a lot of money, and congratulate you on the money you raised for Georgetown. And he's also, just 1 or 2 days ago, the US News and World Report came out with this latest ranking of universities. And please join me in congratulating Georgetown for having moved up to number 21. Congratulations. Jack, under your leadership, you've obviously taken it to great heights. But in addition to being a great university administrator, He continues to be a thought leader. He and I have met several times in Davos at the Global University Leaders Forum talking about global issues. And he continues also to teach a course full-time in the Georgetown University, and at the same time continuing to lecture and speak around the world. And for us, it is really wonderful that Jack has flown halfway across the world to spend 2 days with us, deliver this lecture, and return. And for this, Jack, we thank you very, very much. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Kishore. And it is a great honor for me to be here in Singapore to deliver this St. Lee Distinguished Lecture on Universities for a Global Society. I'm especially grateful to the philanthropist, businessman, and extraordinary benefactor of higher education, Mr. Lee, who made this lecture and so many others around the world possible by providing a platform for scholars and policymakers to address critical international issues. Mr. Lee not only encourages international scholarship, he enhances our ability to address our common problems in common cause. I also wish to thank University President, Professor Tan Chor Chuan, an international leader in promoting global education, and one of the great global leaders in higher education today. And of course, to my dear friend Kishore Mahbubani, the Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, an accomplished diplomat, for hosting this lecture and for this wonderful hospitality that has been shown me on my first visit to Singapore. It's also a privilege for me to be here at the National University of Singapore, one of our world's great universities, a leader in engineering, the life sciences, biomedicine, the social sciences, and natural sciences. May our noble aspiration bring Singapore success, notes the national anthem of Singapore, and I have no doubt that through the outstanding work of your 14 faculties and schools, the National University of Singapore has done so, while also advancing the boundaries of knowledge and contributing to the betterment of society. The work that you do here to promote knowledge and human development, as well as your university's motto, towards a global knowledge enterprise, resonates deeply with efforts in which we are engaged in the university that I have called my home now for more than 3 decades. We too are striving to evolve into a truly global university. And to be a global university requires a different way of engaging with our world. It requires that we recognize that global means multilateral, multinational, and multicultural. It's why we were so happy to join with the National University of Singapore and with 10 other leading universities from 6 continents to establish our Center for Transnational Legal Studies in London. It's also why we participate in student exchanges between our law schools and beginning this fall with our schools of public policy. The work to evolve into global universities is imperative in our increasingly globalized world where nations are more interconnected, individuals more interdependent. Perhaps nowhere is the increasing pace and growing importance of globalization more obvious than right here in Singapore, recognized as the most globalized nation on earth. So in a world increasingly defined and characterized by globalization, I believe there are urgent questions that we must address from the perspective of the university. We are unique institutions, and I believe we bear a special responsibility in responding to the forces of globalization. What are the responsibilities of a university in responding to globalization? Have we achieved a consensus regarding the phenomena of globalization? If we have, do we know how we are to respond? And do we have a sense of the moral responsibilities that emerge in a world shaped by this phenomena. So I wish to begin with a working definition of this multifaceted phenomena. I offer nothing original here. I believe the term globalization captures the convergence of forces that include new information, communication, and transportation technologies that create unprecedented opportunities to be engaged, connected, and present in different parts of our world. I agree with President Lee Bollinger of Columbia University, who delivered the inaugural St. Lee lecture here at the Lee Kuan Yew School last fall, when he said, here, globalization is first and foremost an economically driven phenomenon. Globalization is driving greater integration of markets and is expanding the opportunities for trade in goods and services between and among nations. But what kind of response does globalization demand? These forces have provided for extraordinary economic growth. China is considered the case study of how a country can benefit from participation in a globalized economic system, with more than 300 million Chinese moving out of poverty in the past generation. But globalization is also blamed for increasing inequalities across nations. The rich getting richer, the poor poorer. Half of the world still lives on less than $2 a day, more than 1 billion on less than $1 a day. Globalization is regarded as a source of fragmentation, division, and it's implicated in this growing inequality. And there's also growing consensus that our international institutions are not designed to cope with this new context. Our most significant institutions are the products of a post-World War II context and are insufficient to respond to the emerging challenges of our time: climate change, nuclear proliferation, pandemics. New structures are needed, and no one has provided more significant global leadership in addressing this need for new structures for global governance than Kishore Mahbubani, and I've learned much from his example. Today, I wish to bring the issue of globalization into the context of the university. And it is within the context of the university that I believe we can find the resources for addressing the questions of moral responsibility. Specifically, it is the very ethos of a university that we can bring to bear on the challenges posed by globalization. By ethos, I mean the characteristic spirit that animates the identity and purpose of the university. In my remarks, I wish to recast the framing of globalization within that ethos of the university. The characteristic spirit of the university is to seek the betterment of humankind. Consider these words from the mission statement of this university. The National University of Singapore mission comprises 3 mutually reinforcing thrusts: transformative education that nurtures thinking individuals who are alive to opportunities to make a difference, are valued members and leaders of society, and global citizens in diverse settings. High-impact research that advances the boundaries of knowledge and contributes to the betterment of society. Dedicated service as a national university that adds to social, economic, and national development. How can we harness the forces of globalization in the service of these 3 themes? I believe first and foremost we must assert ourselves, animated by the values that are so present here in this academic community, the values that animate this academic community, and work to reshape the very meaning of the term globalization. I believe our understanding of globalization is too limited, too constrained. I don't believe our understanding of globalization should be defined simply by economic terms and market considerations. Instead, globalization should be understood as a force through which we can further advance the betterment of humankind. Globalization poses new challenges and presents new opportunities, and perhaps the most significant is how we interpret the reality that we are experiencing. Animated by our ethos, our characteristic spirit, I believe our universities offer important resources for reframing our understanding. I wish to suggest 4 areas for reflection that resonate with this ethos of the university. And it is my hope that by engaging these 4 areas of reflection, we might open up and broaden our understanding of the meaning of globalization. So the first responsibility of the university is the development of the intellect of the young people who come to our campuses. The ethos of the university includes, in the words of my colleague at Georgetown, the distinguished historian John O'Malley, a recognition of the preeminence of truth and the dignity of the quest for it. We seek to instill the habits of mind that will sustain this quest. We seek to nurture thinking individuals who are alive to opportunities to make a difference. Now, no one has captured the ethos and identity of the university more than John Henry Newman, who in 1 month will be beatified by Pope Benedict XVI. Newman wrote in the lectures that became the idea of the university that the purpose of university education is, quote, the real cultivation of mind, the intellect properly trained and formed to have a connected view or grasp of things. By connected view, Newman means the ability to develop a comprehensive view of truth in all its branches, of the relations of science to science, of their mutual bearings, and their respective values. Newman's committed to the idea that we can aspire to what would have been called in the 19th century universal knowledge, a belief in a unity of knowledge which is within the grasp of a cultivated intellect. We seek to understand each of the disciplines, but also the relationship of the disciplines to one another. Now, Newman's conception of a unity of knowledge would not be held in our contemporary academy. Our practices of disciplinary specialization and the sheer complexity of what we now know make the thought of such integration implausible. But what if, in our pursuit of new concepts that could guide us in responding to globalization, we re-examine, from the perspective of now the 21st century, but we re-examine this key insight of Newman, that the purpose of university education is to grasp the truth and the connections between and among the disciplines. Now, coming from a very different perspective than Newman, the distinguished biologist E.O. Wilson raised just this prospect at the end of the last decade. What if we could establish as an element of our intellectual agenda this challenge of integration of knowledge, the exploration of the potential for what Wilson called consilience? What if globalization could come to be understood as an effort at seeking consilience. Now, a second responsibility of the university entails the formation of character. We use different words to capture this idea. At Georgetown, we describe this aspect of our mission as educating, quote, women and men to be responsible and active participants in civic life and to live generously in service to others. The idea is captured beautifully in the words of your mission statement. Individuals who are alive to opportunities to make a difference are valued members and leaders of society and global citizens in diverse settings. This idea is deep in the ethos of the Academy, with its roots in the humanism of the Renaissance. The great formulators of this aspect of our ethos, Erasmus, Bruni, Petrarch, sought to ensure a focus on citizenship, on civic responsibility, on the formation of character. The locus of this work is in the disciplines we call the humanities. Could we imagine an ideal like that articulated in your mission statement of global citizenship? An ideal of global civic responsibility? What would it look like? And what kind of preparation might be required for such citizenship and for such responsibility? Well, we offer the very best settings in the world for the living of these questions. We are the homes to the most extraordinary young people, with access to the best that has been thought and written, and connected to one another in ways that are unprecedented in the history of our world. For our students, globalization means connectedness. It means access to ideas. It means an ability to participate in the construction of knowledge, in the building of communities. So how do we understand the nature of the interior lives of our young people? How are they making sense of our world and their place in it? What effect are new technologies for connecting with one another having on their ways of making meaning in their lives? How are their imaginations being formed, and how do they understand the depth and breadth of their possibilities? An important insight for us to consider was provided this past April by Adolfo Nicolas, the Superior General of the Jesuit Order, in a speech to a gathering of educators from Jesuit colleges and universities in Mexico City. He noted, quote, "We need to understand this complex new interior world created by globalization. This interior world, the conscience and the imagination that emerges, shapes the nature of one's engagement in the world. Can we imagine a global citizen? Can we ensure that our engagement with the humanities provides our students with the resources to inform an interior life capable of emerging with a sense of responsibility for others in the world?" Now, beyond the humanities, we offer other resources that contribute to an understanding of responsibility. This leads me to a third set of reflections that emerge from the ethos of the university and that I hope can expand our conception of globalization. There has been a development that has been underway now for the past 2 decades, a development that has the potential to transform the way we understand the nature of our responsibilities to one another. The development is best captured in the series of publications that will celebrate their 20th anniversary this year. Beginning in 1990, the United Nations has produced an annual Human Development Report. The intellectual father of this initiative is the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, who over the course of his career has developed a set of ideas that is transforming the way we understand our responsibilities to one another. Now, we refer to this set of ideas as the human development and capability approach. This approach seeks to address the underlying economic, social, and political conditions that enable each of us to fulfill our promise and potential. This is an approach to development in which the objective is to expand what people are able to do and to be. Now, the animating concepts were established in the very first Human Development Report. Human development was defined as, quote, both the process of widening people's choices and the level of their achieved well-being. The core idea, the purpose of development, is to enhance people's capabilities. What is meant by capabilities? A capability is the freedom to promote or achieve what one values doing and being. It is the freedom to engage in the practices and activities that one values doing and for which there is a value doing. It is through these activities that each one of us achieves well-being or human flourishing. The question that Professor Sen asks, and that is at the heart of the human development approach, do you have the capability to engage in the activities, the practices, what Professor Sen calls the functionings that matter most to you? Do the social, political, and economic structures provide you with the framework to achieve this capability? For so much of the modern era, we have considered our responsibilities to each other within the poles of utilitarianism and duty-based theories, between the poles of John Stuart Mill and Immanuel Kant. For so much of the modern era in our understanding of political economy, this has translated into a focus on GDP. The human development and capability approach asks us to consider a different way. And again, in the words of the first Human Development Report, the basic objective of development is to create an enabling environment for people to enjoy long, healthy, and creative lives. This may appear to be a simple truth, but it is often forgotten in the immediate concern with the accumulation of commodities and financial wealth. It's lost with a focus on GDP. I believe the idea of human development resonates deeply with the ethos of the university. Can you imagine an account more focused on the betterment of humankind? I believe it's critical for us to embrace this new understanding of our responsibilities to each other for full, integral human development. It would be invaluable if we could support efforts to expand an understanding of globalization that accepts this understanding of human development. Beyond that, could we imagine in the exercise as universities of our institutional agency, the university playing a deeper role in this work of human development? Now, this is a challenging question, and let me offer one example from my own context of how challenging this can be. Colleagues of mine at Georgetown at our Center on Education in the Workforce, led by the distinguished economist Anthony Carnevale, issued a report this summer entitled Help Wanted, Projections of Job and Education Requirements through 2018, focused on the United States. Their report projected both job and employment growth in the United States in the coming decade. They project that the U.S. economy will produce 22 million jobs by 2018. But nearly 2/3 of all jobs that will need to be filled in this decade will require some post-secondary education. Their key finding: we will underproduce post-secondary graduates by approximately 3 million by 2018. Our colleges and universities will underproduce people prepared for those 22 million jobs, will miss it by 3 million. Job creation is an element of human development. Leaders of colleges and universities have long accepted a role for our schools in supporting regional economic development. In the words of your mission statement, dedicated service is a national university that adds to social, economic, and national development. The findings of my colleagues point to what is something of a structural issue in the United States. In the next decade, given current patterns, we will not produce 3 million people in need of post-secondary education. The challenges are more acute in other parts of the world. Unemployment is above 25% in South Africa, 20% in Nigeria and Spain, 13% in Ireland, between 17 and 20% in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. In the United States, we have our highest rate in 2 decades. The 5th volume of the Arab Human Development Report estimates that 51 million new jobs must be created in the Arab world by 2020. 51 million new jobs in the Arab world by 2020. This will be the largest group of young people entering the workforce in the Arab world, and the current projections for job creation will not meet these needs. How do universities respond to these kinds of structural needs? We teach, we do research, we care for patients in our academic medical centers, we provide service, usually in our local communities, in some cases in different parts of the world. We play a role in supporting regional economic enterprise. In a few circumstances, we're creating businesses that evolve from the research in our laboratories. But we are now engaged in the world in ways that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. And a new understanding of our responsibilities to one another is emerging in this new logic of human development. Can we find ways to contribute to addressing structural constraints to human development? We have an opportunity to expand both our understanding of the nature of globalization and to expand our understanding of the nature of a university's institutional agency. A 4th set of reflections. I believe we are uniquely capable of expanding the conception of globalization to capture a greater capacity for understanding one another across boundaries and differences. Our campuses have long been melting pots, with students and faculty coming together from throughout the world, creating academic communities shaped by a common commitment to learning, scholarship, and research. Can we draw from this characteristic of our campuses and commit to deepening our efforts at mutual understanding? There's one area I wish to propose that I believe is of critical importance at this time. Can we consider the possibility of more deeply engaging our religious traditions in the work of the academy? I don't mean simply as objects of study. We have pursued the formal study of religion for nearly 150 years in our universities. I mean engaging the intellectual dimensions of our religious traditions on their terms, bringing them into the discourse that takes place in the contemporary academy. I make this recommendation particularly in the context of expanding our conception of globalization, and I do so for 2 reasons. First, our world has become much smaller, and those with different faiths are in much more proximate contact with one another, both physically and through advances in communications technology. We can no longer avoid, ignore, be indifferent to those of different faiths. And we need to know each other at ever-deepening levels. If a significant part of a person's identity is animated by a commitment to a faith, it's critical that we come to understand the dimensions of that faith if we're to understand one another. And second, our religious traditions are repositories of deep wisdom. As we seek to explore the impact of globalization on the interior lives of people, these wisdom traditions offer important resources for self-understanding and mutual understanding. I think for too long we have cut off from academic discourse the insights of these traditions. I wish to offer one last comment. As I prepared these remarks, it was impossible not to be deeply moved by the confluence of disasters that are hitting our sisters and brothers in different places around our world. At one point this past week, 557 wildfires raged over 1,740 square kilometer region southeast of Moscow. In China, more than 1,000 lives were lost in Gansu province as a result of mudslides. A third of Pakistan was underwater. A submerged area as big as the United Kingdom. 14 million Pakistanis have been affected, 2 million are homeless. At times, it seems that we have to be prepared to consider crisis management an aspect of everyday life. If we're able to understand the nature of our moral responsibility in a context of globalization, we must acknowledge that our academic communities must be prepared to engage these issues. Animated by a characteristic spirit, we need to learn how to work together, how to learn together, to determine how we, all of us, understand the nature of this world in which we live and our responsibilities for it. Globalization provides unprecedented opportunities to better humankind. The ethos of the university, our characteristic spirit, is to seek the betterment of humankind. We need to enrich our conception of globalization. There is work here that is properly that of the university that can enrich our understanding of globalization. Is it possible that one day when people think of globalization, the ideas that come to mind are the search for consilience, for the unity of knowledge? Is it possible that globalization will entail a commitment to global citizenship and global civic responsibility? Could globalization come to capture the idea of integral human development and articulate the expectation that in the exercise of a university's institutional agency, the university would play a role in such development? Could globalization mean a capacity to know one another more deeply, to understand one another and the deepest sources of our commitments with empathy? Could globalization come to mean an understanding of a more profound responsibility we have for our world and for one another? Now is the time for us, for our communities of learning, to step in and offer our contribution to our understanding of globalization, an understanding that has at its core an acknowledgement and an appreciation of the inherent human dignity of every individual in our global community. It's an honor for me to be here with you all today, and it's been a privilege to spend this time offering these remarks, and I look forward to the opportunity now to engage with all of you in a conversation regarding some of the issues that I've presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jack. You've given us a lot to reflect on. I think we probably have to read your speech again to absorb all the 4 reflections that you shared with us. We're going to have Q&A. Now, please get ready for your questions. But I have the privilege of asking the first one.
Sure.
And, you know, one thing that you and I share in common, Jack, is that both you and I studied philosophy. And I remember vividly when I was studying philosophy, mainly Western philosophy, as a young man, there was a very optimistic assumption that as we all became more educated, we'd all become more civilized, and the world would come together. But we know from reality today that in many instances, you can have education, you can go to universities, and education doesn't produce harmony. It actually produces divisions. And to give you the most obvious examples that I mentioned in my remarks, there's some tension between Islam and the West. Now, I know that Georgetown University has done a lot of work in that area. You've done a tremendous amount of work there, and you have a campus in Doha. So from your perspective, looking at the recent sort of difficulties between Islam and the West, what would you offer as suggestions, broad suggestions, of what can we do?
Sure. Let me put it in the context of some work we're deeply engaged in, because I think over the course of roughly the last 4 decades, but more specifically the last roughly 15 years, our university has been deeply engaged in trying to foster interreligious understanding. And let me put it in a little bit of perspective for you. Georgetown is the oldest Catholic university in the United States. We were founded in 1789, and we were founded in a tradition of Catholic education that is animated by the spirit of the Jesuits. It had a long history of missionary work in Asia. Probably the iconic figure is Matteo Ricci, who set a standard for positive engagement in a different part of the world. We made a decision back in the late 1960s to bring aboard a rabbi into our community. And he's been with us 41 years. And we were the first Catholic university to have a full-time rabbi as a part of our community to foster dialogue with the Jewish tradition. About 11 years ago, we brought aboard first American university to bring aboard a full-time imam into our community. And so we have a full-time rabbi, a full-time imam, a whole bunch of Roman Catholic priests, nuns, Protestant ministers.
That's a prescription for trouble.
All of the offices for these folks are right below mine, and whenever I hear a racket downstairs, I say, that's interreligious dialogue at its best. But they engage together with one another in this work. And that gave us a confidence level that we could take deeper steps. So about 15 years ago, we established the Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding. And we brought in as our founding director, Professor John Esposito. And John, many of you would know, is truly one of the great interpreters of Islam to the West, and has provided us with an unusual resource in the center, now called the Al-Walid Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding, to provide us with a framework for that kind of dialogue. And since then, we also created another study center called the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. And this was really to provide us a more intentional and explicit context to explore the role of religion in international affairs today, and the role of peace building. We also developed a program building from the presence of our rabbi, a Center for the Study of Jewish Civilization. What these have provided us has been an opportunity, institutional structures that have enabled us to move beyond what we could do in traditional disciplines and bring people not just across our campus, but across the world together in dialogue with us at Georgetown. We have provided an institutional home that has sustained a dialogue led by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, and his dialogue, which moves from place to place around the world, but every third year or so comes back and is at Georgetown. But we provide an institutional home for it, the support to sustain that dialogue wherever it might be. Professor Esposito provides the North American home for A Common Word, which was a dialogue initiated by Prince Ghazi of Jordan, brought together 135 Muslim leaders from around the world to enter into dialogue with Christian leaders from different parts of the world. And just this past year, we held the fourth in a series of meetings. One took place at Yale, one at Cambridge in England, one at the Vatican, and the fourth one at Georgetown, really bringing together the largest gathering of its kind of Muslim and Christian leaders engaged in direct dialogue. What we have found in this work is by providing that context where we can build a framework of trust, where whatever my perspective might be, I will be respected for it, and I won't have to defend it. I will come with an expectation that I will be given an empathic interpretation, a sympathetic reading of the perspective that I bring, with the goal of trying to understand what we don't understand about one another. What we believe in this work, and it was embedded in the fourth set of reflections that I was offering, is that in so many lives, the deepest level of meaning is informed by a faith commitment, by a tradition of faith to which one is deeply committed. How do we enable that dimension of one's identity to have a place in the discourse in a contemporary academy? And we've created these structures that we hope are providing that kind of context where we can get to know each other at ever deeper and deeper levels. And we do the academic study, but we also provide a framework where what we're really trying to provide is that trust that I can share with you and you can share with me from the depth of your being, your deepest commitments, your deepest beliefs, what animates you, and to bring that into the discourse that we would always be comfortable with in the academy, but now to do so, I think, in a context of trust that without this depth of foundational work that we've been engaged in, I'm not sure we would have confidence in.
Great. I'm glad that you're doing a lot of good work in that area. Who's next? Please, gentleman here and then gentleman here. Please come up. Just identify yourself and then pose a very difficult question for him, please.
I'll try. I'm a Hoya, SFS01. And so my question to you would be, when you talk about civic and social responsibility, and also the importance of interior lives, I'm wondering what role then does the university play? Well, what role does the university play in sort of taking intellectual openness within that context? I ask because I'm curious about not just the usual academic freedoms, but also the ability, the space, right, to speak truth to power, to speak truth in the face of the force of public opinion. And I ask this in particular because you are from Georgetown, and you're no stranger to controversies, that have been laid out by parts of the Catholic Church, and by lay people, by public opinion over issues ranging from gay rights to abortion, to the hanging of crucifixes in classrooms, and also you're also no stranger to the kind of positive outcomes that active student pressure can bring in the sort of anti-sweatshop campaign that we've seen, in the sort of fair trade campaign that we've seen at Georgetown. So I'm wondering, what role you see for that sort of that intellectual openness in the sort of themes that you touched on. Thank you.
Yes. It's a crucial, before I answer, let me make sure everybody in the audience can identify with your opening comment. The Georgetown University, our nickname are the Hoyas. And often people will ask, well, what's a Hoya? And the correct answer to that is, that's right. So a little bit of history. Georgetown University once had a national championship level football team. And their defense were once called the Stonewalls. And our students, coming up with a clever fight song, ended the fight song with the phrase Hoya Saxa, which was to impress their classics professors that they knew both Greek and Latin. The Greek word for Hoya the Greek word hoya for what, the Latin word saxa for rocks. Hoya saxa, what rocks these stone walls are. And it got shortened to the Georgetown Hoyas. So if anybody ever asks you, what is a Hoya? The correct answer is, that's right. So we are the Georgetown Hoyas. The question is a terrific one. And if you embedded in that set of reflections regarding the formation of character is this idea of civic responsibility, civic engagement. And we believe that we have to provide a context in which we live those values. So we are a place that has truly engaged the most challenging and difficult issues. Often they're uncomfortable for us to engage, but we recognize the responsibility we have to engage them. I made reference to civic engagement, civic responsibility. The way I talked about it was a bit in terms of process. I didn't get at the substance of what that might be, because I think that's what's required in the conversations and the work that takes place in our communities. If we want to capture a concept like global justice, that requires the kind of conversations that can only take place in communities where you have a foundation of trust, a foundation of shared values, recognizing that you are going to create real tension, real division within your own community, but that you have a confidence level that you can manage that you can manage that division, you can manage that controversy, you can manage those disagreements. When we recognize there need to be certain boundaries, and when we step outside those boundaries, we have to take some steps to pull things back in. But the key thing, I believe, is to create, again, that framework of trust where you can engage these ideas in the deepest level possible and engage these tensions. And it's by engaging those tensions, living with those questions, that I believe we have the opportunity to find a response that will work most effectively and most appropriately within a university community. Putting content to civic responsibility requires the kind of conversations that I believe, if they can't take place in our university community, I don't know where they can take place. Because we actually, I believe, do provide a place where the rules of engagement are understood. The values that we share are also understood. And the experience we have for managing these kinds of conversations goes back a long, long way. It doesn't mean that in any given moment, the challenges that we will face will be easy. And nor will it mean that we won't have our divisions and our disagreements within a university community. But I believe what we offer is both a history and a tradition of engagement of those questions. Sometimes we've done it more effectively. Sometimes we've done it more in ways that resonate more deeply with our history and our tradition. But I believe that's what we offer. And if our universities can't provide that framework, I don't know where in our structures of civil society we have that opportunity for that kind of engagement.
Thank you. We go to the back after that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, first of all, thank you very much. It's been a great privilege to listen to you. And an added privilege in the sense that I have been to your university. It's a great institution to speak. And I follow up from the previous questioner as well. And there are several layers that I'm trying to unravel in my mind. And one of them prompts me to begin with my senior Kishore sitting there, and we both did philosophy on this very campus. And one of the things that I remember my philosophy guy telling me, and that didn't always sit well with many of my colleagues, meaning the students, and not also with the colleagues, his colleagues, meaning the professors, was that what has Athens to do with Jerusalem? That old concept. What has Athens to do with Jerusalem? Yeah. Remember Anselm? About 10 months ago, my university, I'm from Singapore Management University, we had a seminar on Thomas Aquinas and his views on education. The feedback was manifold, starting with why Aquinas, why not somebody else, meaning there was already tension and friction. But one of the things that the Thomistic philosophy and the people who were present wanted to raise in terms of the role of a university was the obvious conflict, obvious to almost everybody, but not obvious enough to allow people to have the sort of, Lee Kuan Yew would have said, gumption and guts and courage to actually take the bull by the horns and address it. The fact that, and I think you alluded to it, sir, so with all due respect to what you said, is the whole idea of trying to create graduates who will fill those jobs. And therefore, Sen's idea of functionaries becomes critical as well, because the nation expects you to do that at one level. On the other hand, that is very closely aligned to what you yourself so beautifully raised. That is the preponderance of the GDP.
Right.
And I think inherent to all of this is a very terrible paradox and complex sort of conflict, which I think all universities have to grapple with. My one other question, and I want to be edified by you, is the fact that when we think of religion, and again you alluded to it, and I suppose the chartered territory in Singapore has been somewhat convoluted in terms of space for discussion of all kinds of sensitive subjects. Bearing that in mind, you said that universities and university leadership must be brave enough and robust enough to assert itself.
Right.
So a student, actually today, because I cut short my lectures today at the university to attend your talk, said to me, she said, oh, so could you ask the speaker maybe this one question? So I'm asking on her behalf. It's an interesting question and ties in with you. And that is that recently we've been getting in our newspaper reports that there was a movement. I don't know what happened because I had no time to follow it up, so forgive me for that. But there are people in US of A that wanted to do this bonfire of the Quran. There's this huge demonstration. They want to just burn this book, which in many ways going back, decades and maybe centuries. But my student wanted to know, given this assertion on that side, what is the kind of assertions and what's the kind of platforms and the stands that universities in America have taken, and what did my university, SMU, take? Well, at the moment we do nothing because it's so sensitive. But I'm just wondering whether there is a paralysis both of imagination and confidence. Thank you, sir.
I should mention Jack Karpal and I both studied in this campus, but he's gone up in the world and he's now teaching.
Well,
he's also a full-time poet, by the way.
Thank you. Well, those are three very, very important and very challenging questions. So let me try to see if I can offer some reflections on them. Athens and Jerusalem, the university's role in job creation, and then a response to
the burning of the Quran,
to a tragedy like you have just described. So first, on Athens and Jerusalem, this goes back to the classic scholar Tertullian. What does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? It was originally, I think, a framework of trying to understand what reason offers to revelation. I think over the years we've come to understand it's a mutuality of relationship. What do our religious traditions offer our more rational traditions? What our rational traditions offer our more religious-based traditions? And it's very interesting because that question informed a good deal of how I prepared myself for these remarks. How does a university that brings with it a tradition that's comfortable living with this question of what Jerusalem offers to Athens, how does a university understand the nature of its responsibilities in this moment? And I believe it is this recognition of a convergence, again embedded in my remarks, between the culture of the university that is committed to the most rigorous analysis, the most rigorous scholarship, the most rigorous research, and the responsibility that a university has to the formation of imagination, the formation of character, the formation of civic responsibility. Now, that tension, that's a contemporary interpretation of the question of Athens and Jerusalem. My colleague, who I made reference to in my remarks, John O'Malley, wrote a beautiful book just a few years ago called The Four Cultures of the West. And his second culture is the culture of the university. His third culture is the culture of what he called the colleges, the culture of humanism, really emerging in what evolved as the Jesuit colleges in the 16th and 17th centuries, where the grounding was in Cicero, the grounding was in Renaissance humanism, and the recognition that the humanities brought a different set of perspectives into the work of the university. But it's a tension that exists side by side, that we try to reconcile, but are always a little bit at odds with one another. And so I would say that the most important thing for a university is to recognize that we are a home to that tension, and we need to provide the space for that tension to work its way through, whether it's in the contemporary interpretation or whether we try to go back and re-examine how we have framed that tension, and whether there's some elements we left behind in the Enlightenment that might be re-examined, and now this sort of postmodern period, might we be able to re-examine some of the questions that the tension between Athens and Jerusalem raises. The first chapter of John's book, The Four Cultures of the West, is Athens and Jerusalem. And so I think you'd find a great deal of value in taking a look at his book. Now, your second question, how does an institution committed to that take on this question of job creation? I don't know. We're trying to wrestle with this. I made reference to it a few times in provocative ways. I called it institutional agency. I don't know where the boundaries of that are, but I know we exercise our agency every day because we're one of the major employers in the District of Columbia. In Washington, D.C., we're one of the largest employers. We're engaged in the local economy in ways that I don't think we imagined when Newman wrote the idea of the university. How do we engage as an institution in this work of regional economic development? And I feel very challenged by the work of Professor Sen in trying to understand what the role a university has in addressing these deeper questions of human development. And I look around and I think, let's assume that's not our place. Our place is research and scholarship, the transmission of knowledge, the dissemination of knowledge. That's the stuff we do. We're not in this other work. Well, who steps in? What institutions would take on that role and responsibility? And so it's led me to think we've got to explore the nature of our responsibility. It's a new tension. I don't know what that means, but when my colleague, Tony Carnevale, put his report out in mid-June this year, America has a fantastic, the greatest system of higher education in the world. And we can't produce 3 million more people in the next 8 years to enter our workforce with some post-secondary education. We lose a tremendous amount of people through our pipeline. Only about a quarter of the American population has a college degree. We have huge penetration rates. They aren't what they used to be. We used to be the best in the world. Now we're 12th. A little under 50% of our population will get an experience in a post-secondary institution. But only about half of that will graduate from a post-secondary institution. It's a lot of lost talent. If we use the vocabulary of a political economy, this is lost human capital. What is our responsibility to that? And I ask myself the same question that I do in response to the challenges of Professor Sen, which is, if we don't step in and try to address this challenge of ensuring more people get through this pipeline of post-secondary education, who will step in and do that? And so it's a tension. We can't ever give up the unique things that we do, the thing that no one else does in our society, which is to provide that framework for the deepest scholarship, the deepest research, and for the sharing of that learning with the next generation. No, that's our being. But we're more complex, and our place in the world is very different today. I mean, look at me. I'm on a stage in Singapore. The place I run is 220 years old. The place I've called home, the place that I share, has had a place in American higher education for 2 centuries. This is the first visit of a Georgetown president in Singapore. What does that mean? And what is the nature of our responsibility as a university, given that it makes sense for me to be here? I mean, it's not some crazy act on the part of a dean or a president. I'm not a novelty. A more distinguished colleague than I was here a year ago. More will follow. Our place in the world is changing. How do we understand the nature of that place in the world? And so I pose it as a question because it's a question we have to live, we have to engage. And the tensions that are embedded in it are truly profound. I'm not familiar with the book burning, the burning of the Quran that you're making reference to. I haven't heard of that story. But I hope my description of the way in which we've tried to engage over the last generation and in trying to ensure that in our place, where I think partly because we are a Catholic university, we're comfortable in the discourse of faith, of religion. It's a vocabulary, it's a rhetoric, it's a grammar we have some experience with. And it in no way compromises our ability to function as a contemporary university. In fact, we think it amplifies and offers us additional resources to bring to bear. This is an exciting moment for universities because we think there are new resources that we've not really engaged, that we can engage in this new era. And we believe it's crucial to do so. And so our Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, the Al-Walid Center, our Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, our work in the study of Jewish civilization, is our effort to try to ensure that the resources of a university are informing this conversation, both in our nation and around our globe. And we do some of it by doing very high-profile events where we're kind of demonstrating in a very public way how to do this and the significance of doing it. And we're going to keep doing that because we believe it's just crucial at this moment.
I saw a lady raising a hand. Please, sorry, my mistake. Yeah, please come forward. And then the gentleman at the back there, yeah.
Mr. President DeGioia, did I pronounce your name correctly?
DeGioia.
DeGioia. Is that better?
It's Italian.
Okay. The role of government, as you know, has increased ever since 2008, and before that, 2001. And correspondingly, the role of Georgetown in its eminent place in Washington, D.C. I have a similar but additional concern that was expressed by the former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, where she said that, in her opinion, foreign service officers are lacking in the area of religious education. And
religious education?
Yes. In her book, The Mighty and the Almighty.
Right.
And I see that Georgetown is doing a fantastic job in that. However, my additional concern is that could it be that given the current environment, many present and future politicians may be lacking in the area of accounting, finance, and economic education. And I recall that it was Warren Buffett who personally coached Katharine Granham, the former chairman of Washington Post, in financial matters when she suddenly was entrusted with the management of Washington Post. And there's a story that once when he stepped into her office, she had something written in big letters, asset on the left-hand side, liabilities on the right-hand side. I wonder if you consider inviting Warren Buffett to coach the present and future politicians on accounting, finance, and economics.
Oh, those are great questions. So let me say a couple of words about this. If I could just, Madeleine Albright's been a distinguished member of our faculty for a good part of her career. In fact, before she went into government service as our UN ambassador back in 1993, she had already been named 4 times Faculty Member of the Year in our School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. And when she returned from government service after serving both at the United Nations and the Department of State, she was again named Faculty Member of the Year by the students in the School of Foreign Service.
That's amazing.
So she's an invaluable member of our community. And it was those insights that you just shared that has helped to inform the way in which we've tried to rethink and strengthen the kind of experience we're providing on our campus. It's important to know that generally, and this would go back 4 centuries, but generally, since the Treaty of Westphalia, religion and international relations were kind of kept apart. I think if you looked under a typical international relations textbook through most of the last generation, you wouldn't find under R the word religion. It's just not part of the way in which generations of Western diplomats were trained. Just not part of it. I think we recognized over this last generation that as globalization has had its effects, one of the effects is to bring our religions more into the awareness of our consciousness, of their significance and how people work in their worlds and how they engage in their worlds. And so it was a very intentional effort on our part to try to ensure that those who would be making their way in the world would have more exposure to the role that religion plays. And so that has informed significantly the work that we're engaged. So I'll tell you a funny story. After she retired from the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor brought to Georgetown a project called, the goal was to work to strengthen a free and independent judiciary. She's very concerned watching how local races for judgeships were taking place around our country, that there was a deterioration in the freedom and the independence of the judiciary. And one of her dear friends is Warren Buffett. So we had a big event, and it was a few-day conference. 7 members of the Supreme Court came to the conference. And Warren Buffett came for the whole thing, primarily because he is very good friends with Sandra Day O'Connor. So he was sitting with me and at dinner one night, and I was just incredibly honored to be in his presence. I had read all of his annual reports over the years, and he's such an iconic figure in America that this was really a privilege to be with him. So he's sitting next to me, and he said, so how are things at Georgetown? I said, they're going well. He goes, my very first job was at Georgetown. I was completely speechless. No one at Georgetown knew this. I said, what did you do at Georgetown? Well, he was in high school at the time. His father was a member of Congress, and he was living in Washington. And it was during the war. And he said, I had a paper route that included Georgetown University and its hospital. And it was a great paper route because hospitals had lots of people who needed papers. So he said it was a terrific job, and I really enjoyed my work there. I'm still trying to figure out the most appropriate way to bring him back to the place where he got his start. But I haven't quite figured that out yet.
I think he'll make a donation or 2.
But his wisdom would be the most significant thing we could benefit by, because he really does bring such a unique perspective. And I do think One of the things that we've tried to do, and it's evident by the presence of Madeleine Albright, but we've tried to bring in to complement and support our core faculty, some distinguished practitioners who bring a different kind of experience that we believe complements that of our academic strength. And so, for example, over the years, in addition to Madeleine Albright, we've had people like Anthony Lake, who actually just left us after a decade to become the director of UNICEF. But Professor Lake brought invaluable perspectives to our work. Anwar Ibrahim from Malaysia has been with us as a visiting faculty member on occasions. Most recently, Andy Stern, the recent head of one of the larger unions in the United States, our Service Employees International Union, joining our faculty as a visiting practitioner. And so we looked for that, and I think the example of the role that Mr. Buffett played in Mrs. Graham's life reflects a bit how we see the importance of getting a balance that complements the strength of your academic community.
Thank you. By the way, as usual, I see at the end lots of hands. I'm just, if you don't mind, I'm going to pick three whom I've seen for a while. The gentleman at the back, Declan, and you over there. I'll take the last three hands, I'm sorry. And if you don't mind, taking notes?
I'll be happy to.
And then we'll take the last three. We only have about 5 minutes left, so we will take all three questions together, and then we will, hopefully you can answer all of them.
I'll do my best.
Please.
Good afternoon, Doctor and President. My name is Harvey Campos from the Philippines. I'm taking up a master's program in the public administration. I do believe that the Jesuits have created great minds and great leaders. I've witnessed of some Jesuit leaders who are now also leading our country. I do believe that the power of actual doing things and engagement has a great impact, not just for the person doing it, but for the persons they're doing it with. I'm referring to people who have done work who are Jesuit trained. Even in the Philippines, I think you might be familiar with Gawad Kalinga.
Yes, I've visited
Tony
there.
Milotto has a Jesuit background, although I'm not from the Jesuit institution.
I would just let you know that Father Ben Nebrez
Father Ben Nebrez.
served for 6 years on our board of directors at Georgetown. So one of the most distinguished leaders in your country.
Okay.
My wife's mother is from Tarlac.
Tarlac, that's good.
So I have a particular affinity.
Come to the Philippines and we have good time there. However, I got to talk to Father Nebrez a few months ago. He gave a lecture to us in one of the East Asian Pastoral Institute. And he said that the many learnings that they have in this institution can really be tested in a crucible of fire. And ironically, it was through the floods in the Philippines that brought about the leadership of different students. And I can relate that the ability of people to collaborate amidst calamities and crises, bring out the best in people in worse times. I'd like to further engage the academy, not just among themselves, but go beyond and think outside the box, so that business leaders, public figures, can participate in the engagement of these great minds in action. So I like to ask if you may have recommendations so that the Western minds and the Eastern minds can create a greater impact into the world and have a global impact in society.
Thank you. Declan? You must get one Irish question.
The home of Newman, yeah. I want to, Declan McFadden, I want to speak from three perspectives. I run a multinational business in Asia, and I'm forever struggling to find graduates who have the holistic view on education and the outputs that I would expect from a good university or a good education. That's one perspective. I speak also as a governor of United World College, which is becoming the largest not-for-profit international school in Singapore, probably in the world, where we're trying to inculcate into students the principles of Kurt Hahn, who had to escape from Nazi Germany and try to get kids to believe in a holistic education and to make society a better place. And I speak as a parent who's certainly worried about the degeneration of society over the last couple of decades. I was at a lecture at one of your colleagues from SMU recently, Professor Brian Mooney, where he lamented strongly the fact that society has devalued education, certainly the Newman concept of education, and valued only the pay packet that certain professions will give to them. And we've got now a very unbalanced output from universities. And I'm not denigrating the need for having, let's say, people involved in the productive end of society. I'm coming from a scientific background myself. But I think universities must play a greater role in balancing the output, and I hate to use that cold word, the output from universities and the types of people who are going to make a change in this society. And I find it very, very difficult to get graduates who have a balanced view on life, and I'd like to know what you see the university doing to have that balanced output. And remember what the Jesuits say, give me the child and I'll give you the man. However, if you stay within the university itself, you're already getting the man at the age of 18, and can you really mold that man as he comes into university? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, the last question over there, please, yes. You're getting very big questions.
Good evening. I'm Ramarao from India. I'm pursuing the Masters in Public Administration course. I have a couple of observations from my personal study. One is the globalization has made the things too fast, from people who are jet-setting to internet speed to some people who are not even seeing their capital city, maybe a few billions in this globe. And the other is the universities are producing people who are highly intellectuals, and there are billions who are not having literacy. There is a highest disconnect. And third is the highly intellectuals are not the demagogues. They are not the politicians who make, not at the very national level, regional level, or the local municipal level. So basically, these all the have-nots, whoever is left behind in the globalization process, that is manifesting into sectarian violence, be it religion, ethnicity. So in this context of globalization and the role of university, universities are giving more and more importance to papers coming in journals and their books, and maybe in this perspective, the academic intelligentsia is spending a lot of time on study within their boardrooms, drawing rooms. And second is, the universities are, nowadays there is a lot of ranking, and basically they may be ranking based on the PhDs they are giving, the patents they are doing, the books they are publishing. And in this perspective, as a president of a university, what do you suggest the ranking? Should some top universities should go and establish campuses in some places like Kabul or in Bangladesh, Dhaka, or some places like in Laos? And should they score some points for establishing campuses there? Second is, should the professors or lecturers or readers or whatever it is in the university should be given grades if they do some work on understanding and human relations and having more time to the students? Thank you.
Thank you. These are three very rich
challenging questions.
So let me try to offer a response to all three of you that I hope will capture elements of interest to you that build from some of the things that I was trying to say. I think the bottom line of what I am trying to communicate is that I believe when universities are at their best, and we're not always at our best, but when we are at our best, when, for example, in the Philippines, when in light of the floods, when you saw the way in which institutions came together, I know you can all find a different example in different parts of the world in which you're familiar, where when you saw us at our best, when we're at our best, it reminds us that we are capable of more. And I don't believe that this tension between being superb at knowledge creation, which, yes, we can be criticized for perhaps overemphasizing things at times, but if we weren't doing that, we would ultimately find our way to be doing that. That the tension between knowledge creation and human development is one that I think we can engage. That it's one that I think we can find the most appropriate way of working through, and that we should expect more of ourselves. I think part of that is trying to capture some of the dimensions of our identity that have very deep roots and that we may have lost some contact with. And I tried to make reference to it, and I tried to put it in a more contemporary vernacular. E.O. Wilson does not mean by consilience the same thing that John Henry Newman meant by the unity of knowledge. But there's something embedded in that tension that is worthy of our attention right now. And I believe that a key to wholeness is an ability to try to search out those conditions that enable each one of us to live a life of human flourishing, to live a life of human well-being. St. Thomas Aquinas offered us an insight into what human flourishing looks like. There's a lot of resonance between human flourishing and contemporary accounts of well-being. There's a richness that can be attained by a dialogue between some of the more classic texts and the contemporary texts. The classic texts informed by things that we've learned. The contemporary texts reminded of some deep wisdom that we may have forgotten. I believe there's a wholeness that can come by engaging these questions in a more profound way and drawing upon the depths of our tradition. And to the first question, I was writing these comments, and they seemed so appropriate for a university president as I was writing them. That's what university presidents say. And I couldn't help but just follow the map of the floods in Pakistan and to think just how relevant is what I have to say to a nation in which a third is underwater. The pictures that we were seeing from the fires in Russia, the mudslides in China. And I say to myself, what is our responsibility? And I can't say we simply do research and scholarship and we share it with the next generation. There is a role for us in this world beyond that. There's more that we need to expect of ourselves. There are moments when we have been at our best. I think that's what we need to capture. That's what we need to engage. And it's the lines of questions that emerge, the tensions that we uncover that require the deepest part of ourselves and the deepest level of engagement possible.
Well, I think, Jack, if I may mention, you began your last response by saying the bottom line. Let me mention 3 bottom lines. First is that you've given us a lot to reflect on, both in your address and in your responses. Secondly, I think the second bottom line is that you've convinced us that we can be optimistic about the role of universities, that universities can make a difference and have made a difference and will continue to make a difference. And the third bottom line is that I think you've demonstrated to us why your university succeeded so much under your leadership. So please join me in thanking Jack for this wonderful
It's an honor to be here.